Good evening. I will call the meeting of the Inland Wetlands Conservation Commission to order. We are down one member, Richard Winters. Kyle, would you? Thank you. Approval minutes. Does anyone?
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend, I would go ahead and amend the agenda. I would do that first. Probably should have made that note, but yeah, you should amend the agenda first to add application CC 2315 for receipt.
And, the application CC 2315 was added late, so we need a motion and a vote to add that to the agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Nice. Approval of minutes. Any changes to the?
I have just one correction. On line 31, against line, I believe the name is Brian.
It also happens on line
37.
37.
Any other? Changes. New applications for receipt recommendations. Application season 2315 is even more order for a permit for creating, clearing, approximately 5,780 square feet of area, 11 Schoolhouse Lane.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, yeah, this is a wetlands permit for receipt for this evening. It's a wetland permit for clearing and grading and tree removal. It's essentially to help level the backyard of the applicants, to make it a little flatter. The nearest point to the designated wetland, the house is about 103 feet from the wetland, so the nearest point of the grading would be about 60 feet by our estimate. The applicant did submit plan and given that to the town engineer to take a look at and help us understand a little bit better the slope conditions, and we'll do that before we come back for action. I think it is helpful to kind of see what the applicant's talking about. He is here this evening, so it is to kind of steady that backyard a little bit, and as well as remove some trees. So this is not in a designated wetlands, it's about 60 feet. So we would recommend a finding of a non-significant activity, and we would schedule it. We would recommend scheduling it for your 5/2 regular meeting. Again, the applicant is here if you have any questions.
Just curious what the focus of this is.
So
Be a wall or?
I think so. I would ask the applicant to come up. Maybe it'd be helpful just for him to help you out. Would you come up, sir? Yes, my understanding is to level the yard a little bit better, but not a wall, but to continue a slope.
Yeah, so
Could you just identify yourself?
I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
The idea is to extend the slope pretty much from the backyard. It is just a steady downhill the entire way with no flat area. It's for young kids trying to extend the existing slope and push it back a little bit so that we have a flat area. It wouldn't be a retaining wall. The same type of slope would just continue further back with a little bit of a flat area top. The tree removal along that line, which is about 40, with the exception of the single tree to the left, is just to get the grass to grow and dry out a little bit. There's quite a bit of moss in the back of the house. The growth of the trees of the 20 years since the house was built. So that's the intent, is just a kind of a flatter area for back here. So you're basically taking that picture and kind of moving it towards the right direction.
How many trees are you?
So there's about 5 large ones along there. The other ones are all about 3 inches. So where I'm standing is one large tree. So there's about 5 along that 40-foot plane, including the one in the middle of the grass.
They are marked on another plan in your packet, and I think it might be good. We'll go ahead and get them marked on this plan.
So I'm just asking, the large oak is staying? Yes, that is the end of the clearing, that's up to whatever is the best recommend. That slope, get a grass going down slope, some sort of vegetation, all back up, whatever is the best.
Any further questions, discussion?
I don't have draft motions for the items for receipt tonight, so please help me out.
Thank you.
Staff would recommend a finding of a non-significant activity and scheduled for May 2.
So. Wait a second. Second. All in favor? Application for receipt, application CC 2313. Chris Nelson, applicant Simsbury LLC, owner for a wetlands permit to replace, rebuild, expand the pedestrian bridge over Hopper 77 West Street, Bill Bright's Restaurants.
So this is probably the most familiar overview I could give to. We're all familiar with the restaurant. So the application is to replace the bridge, which is kind of iconic over the Hop Brook at Millwrights. The applicant has provided a site plan, attempting to use, I think, the plan, and I know Mr. Nelson is here tonight. He is certainly more than happy to answer questions about kind of the approach to reconstruction. I think they want to use existing footings or extended footings. This is all going to take place, obviously, above the water course, not in the water course. I think we've already met with him on site. Town engineers met on site, talking about what does that safety feature look like during construction to protect the water course, tenting and those kinds of things. So we'll certainly work through that and provide a clear plan when we come back to you for action. He has submitted illustratives. There are also, some more, architectural drawings in the packet. It's not in the wetlands, so give a lot of thought about whether you ought to find this a significant activity or not. It's outside of the water course. I think there's erosion and control measures that can be had. And so we would recommend that you find it not a significant activity because of the nature, and schedule it for action on 5/2.
Any questions? Discussion?
So if I understand correctly, they're taking down what's there and building the new structure.
Yes.
Is the
I've asked the applicant to come up. I mean, he really is an expert in the construction business. So
This now, this now, and I've got that's how it is. The bridge actually needs to be replaced.
That was going to be my question.
Yes.
Is it
This is not an option. We don't take it down and redo it. We had structural engineers in and say, well, it's safety now, so you're okay. But within the next few years, we have to do something. And this, because of the pandemic, there's an opportunity to see how much people really appreciate Diamond Bridge. So when we move it and replace it, you might as well widen it by and give that a little bit more just space.
what is it now? The width?
9 foot 6 inches.
It's going to do.
Actually, overall, it's about 10 foot 6 and around 4 foot 6.
How do I do that?
We'll stay. We're not going to do anything with that.
Stop, right? Where it is. Yeah, there we go. Stop.
Side,
There you go.
we are going to have to put a new footing and on the opposite of this, not the stream side of the existing footing, but on the other side, because the building codes have changed so much that what's there wouldn't even be adequate for the current structure based on the building code. So our structural engineers have sent back something that, but it's inland from the edge of the stream. And we can protect that area very easily. It's not really an erosion issue. And that thing is going to be put in and closed back up all in 10 days. So we'll be very, very careful. I think the biggest exposure is making sure when we're doing demolition on the bridge, it's all being done by hand. We're going to be walking all the damage through the pass through to the parking lot. And we're going to have the entire thing tented underneath to catch any potential debris.
Any other questions?
What would be the timing? Like as soon as.
I would like to start it as soon as possible. And so we can have it complete for the fall. It's going to take about 3 months, 4 months for the whole thing. We actually have to bring in cranes. We take all the wood down by cranes, but then we bring on cranes that we crane over the building to get all the steel out of the system. And by the way, part of this application, the existing deck that's out there has been closed for several years because of the same steel. And so we would be taking that away at the same time. That's really why we can do that.
And there's no plans to involve that.
No, there's kind of gets into the zoning issue, but kind of creating the seats and parking from the back. So the seats and public.
And this application will require a site plan and a special exception in front of the zoning commission as well after this process.
Any further questions or discussion?
I'll move that it's finding of not significant activity and to schedule the application for action that are May 2nd.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, moving on to public hearings. Application CC 23-12. Stevens upon Northwest Homes applicant Ryan and Ann O'Donnell owners for a map amendment to the town of Simsbury official wetlands map to clarify the wetland boundary addition to a wetlands permit for construction of a single family home in the open review area at 58 Great Pond Road.
Thank you for reading the call. Excellent.
And this is a public hearing.
This is a public hearing item. So this is it's really an application in two parts. It's a map amendment to the official town wetlands map, and with that, a wetlands permit for essentially the grading and construction activity. Once the soil scientists declared there's no wetland soils on the front of the property, it's moved to the next property because soil scientist doesn't have the ability or the right to determine off-site. Got to move that wetland area to the property below across Great Pond, but it's still within the 100-foot upland review area. So really the area that we're talking about, if you can see it on the screen, probably a little bit better to see. It's that area in brown that identifies wetland soils on the town map. There is wetlands, clear wetlands to the north, off-site, that remains unchanged. So essentially is taking away of that front portion. So the way we do this, of course, the applicant hires a soil scientist, goes out and does the work, provides a letter, provides an opinion, provides a determination. So the applicant soil scientist determined that there are no wetlands present in that southeast section. And so the new map would essentially reflect a straight line movement across Great Pond. And then for the wetlands permit, you've got site grading activity really in the front yard, driveway, grading, those kinds of things. I think the nearest point was about 40 feet. As you go across the road, you go across right away. It's about 40 feet grading. Town engineer produced a letter, the number of comments, particularly related to the extension of silt fencing and some other items the applicant has met and made those revisions and can meet those. The applicant is here tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well as the applicant. And reminder, it is a public hearing, so I'd hear from the applicant first and then open it up. Yeah, come up, Mr. Stone. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Steve Zabon. I very appreciate the opportunity to be heard by the commission here. So Jim Simsbury, so if I record that submitted the letter, and he unfortunately wasn't able to be here today, but Mr. McGregor pretty much said in a nutshell is what we're trying to accomplish here. We did an high intensity soil survey because standard practice with regards to when a soil scientist goes out and delineates wetlands property, and it seems to his determination that there are no wetland soils in front. So we're trying to adjust the GIS mapping line. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Is there gonna be a lot of, I think it's just a blank lot now.
Yes, it's actually used to be like a farm field.
Okay.
So there's actually 3 lots next to each other. This was part of a subdivision back in the 80s, and these were kind of frontage lots that never developed. And then here we are, 20, 30 years later, and we've been slowly developed. So I don't currently own the property. We contract to purchase it, and obviously if this goes right, I will eventually construct a single-family house.
If you recall, you just dealt with 54 Great Pond last month, which was a wetlands permit application. They chose not to investigate the soils. They simply came in for the wetlands permit portion of it. But that's really the next, 54, 56, 58. So one line.
Go what front of the other parcel. Kind of see what that
That's
is
right.
like.
Yeah.
It stopped on 58, and there's a little piece on 56.
Yeah, that's right.
So if somebody decided to buy 56.
Yeah, if you remember, 54 had grading in the rear, and that's why they needed a permit.
So the only other one little piece I think to add to this, we're at this theory for 2 parts. One is the map amendment, the other one is the fact that because we're calling wetland soils on the opposite side of the road with GIS, we're now in the view area. But the one thing to understand about this site is that we do have this road that kind of buffers. It's nearly impossible, even if we consider this wetland view area, it's impossible for any type of sediment to jump over the road and get to the other side, based on the fact that the topography of the lot that we talked about a question is a little bit lower than the road. So everything is very well protected. And, no trees are being cut. The farm field, a little bit of grading kind of up by the front door, but we're kind of keeping the landscape the way it is now.
There is something.
Oh yeah, that's that. We're putting it everywhere, anywhere. That's that line with the black dots on it.
I mean, if you look at it, the silt fencing is really designed to protect that offsite wetland toward the rear there, as well as in the front. So.
Any further questions for any?
So I think if you don't have any other questions for the applicant, it is a public hearing, so you can ask if there's anyone who wants to speak on this application.
Is there anybody? At this application? None. Public hearing.
We'll close the public hearing. Application.
All in favor? Aye. And moving on, any deliberation on permit. Grading construction.
I think before the wetlands permit, we sought to approve the map.
I would recommend doing the map first. Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any discussion or deliberation on approving that? I will entertain a motion.
Move the Conservation Commission approves application CC 2312 of Stephen Zappone, I'm sorry, Zappone of Northwest Homes, applicant Brian and Ann O'Donnell, owners, for a map amendment to the town of Simsbury's official wetlands map to clarify the wetland boundary of 58 Great Pond Road in Simsbury, Connecticut. Based upon the following finding, the proposed revision to the official town wetland map has been delineated by a certified soil scientist.
All in favor? All right. Any discussion or deliberation on the it will entertain a motion on that.
I'll make a motion that the concept to approve the application. 23
Well,
previously described. as this project will, for wetlands permit, the project will not adversely impact the wetlands and the control in place behind the shore.
If you could just reference the conditions drafted in the staff report would be fine.
And so following.
You don't have to read them all, but
There you go.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to full business application CC 2229 at the Western Holdings properties, LLC owner for to grading, construction, set improvements, lot landscaping, chain wall and berber, the upland review. Still an 80 unit or
it's been revised to 64.
okay, 64 unit multifamily development at 46. Middle Street.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would start just a couple of ways, just to remind everybody where we are. You've closed the public hearing, and so that means we're in decision mode at some point. So the public hearing is closed. You cannot receive additional comment from the public. You can't receive testimony from staff. You can't receive new information from the applicant. Any of those kinds of things. It's in your place. Alternates cannot participate unless they are seated. You can ask staff for points of clarification for things on the record, for process-related things, legal guidance that either I can answer today or get with the town attorney and bring back those kinds of things. Just would remind you of a couple other things. A decision either way does require a decision and findings. So whether you vote affirmatively or in the negative requires findings of approval or denial under the statute. Your review criteria, you remember you have reviewed and have been offered a feasible and prudent alternative as part of the process. It'd be up to you to determine whether that goes far enough. You remember you declared a public hearing due to significant activity, and that really, and again, requires the feasible and prudent analysis. It is your job to consider the alternatives. In this case, the alternative that the applicant did offer was the reduction from 80 to 64. Staff has provided affirmative conditions of approval, as we always do, as is our process in every staff report you get. We form and if you're going to approve it, we would recommend these kinds of conditions. So those are in your staff report. Kind of leave them up to show the public as well. I think that's kind of a healthy thing to do. Fairly standard. This page is standard stuff. You have to have the erosion sediment control. We denote the application and the documents that were submitted. In this case, particularly the stormwater and site plan, and then pick up some additional conditions. Of course, this commission, if they were headed in that direction, you're welcome to add additional conditions. So not, the end all. Staff gives you kind of a starting point. We added some additional ones regarding maintenance, on-site maintenance for stormwater facilities. I think that came out a couple of times and the applicant had agreed to it. So we would ask twice a year for the next 3 years to be reviewed by the town engineering department. Also, we've put in place a recommendation for a $50,000 bond or whatever form of surety the applicant chooses for an erosion and sediment control bond. And there was an agreement that the applicant committed in public to the dimming of the parking light, the parking lot lighting. And I didn't put it up here, but the applicant had also agreed, and I put it in your writing, to raise the vinyl fence from 3 foot to 4 foot, and that did not show up on the 4.4 revision. So I would put that in a condition of approval if that's where you're headed. So I do have the site plan up, and again, on the negative side, if we're headed in that direction, again, findings have to be findings should be based on the criteria for review in your regulations. Does the project comply with those regulations? Do they not comply with those regulations. Is there substantial evidence on the record beyond speculation or concern? Or is there evidence in the public record for you to consider? And then I really say this to both the zoning commissions and the wetlands commissions. If you find impacts, can those impacts be mitigated by an additional condition? They can't. You can find that they can't, but can they? And that's just kind of a process that you ought to go through. That's all staff's going to say. It's really for you guys to kind of figure out how you're going to deliberate on this.
So, the suggestion and deliberations, we move through all the wetland centric concerns. Make sure we have them all identified and discuss each one. And see how it's addressed.
Based on, I've only done 3 other additional changes to, zoning or anything, just to be like,
No, since you closed the public hearing, there can't be any additional changes. So the plan that was proposed to you and submitted that evening was the reduction. Is the plan you see in front of you tonight? So that was offered as part of the public record before the close of the public hearing. It's plan dated 4/4, and that included the reduction in units from 80 to 64, as well as the change in pervious parking spaces on the northern part of the property. I think the dumpsters were shown on the for the March 18th meeting, but they are shown on the 4/4. Yes.
So we're taking the final stormwater.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll go first again. You know, there's a lot of discussion obviously about the stormwater treatment, and it seems to me that outside of what's going on here, that the response for how to handle the stormwater, how they are collecting it and trying to do a direct discharge down, and that handles the amount of the water that they're expecting, seems to be kind of a good example of going back and forth with the town engineers and working on that. I'm not sure that we've seen, I mean, it seemed to me that they've done a good job of going through all those pieces. And I think at this point in time, the town engineer is satisfied with that as an answer. And that was my feeling about what I've seen over these things. I mean, each of the concerns that have been raised during the public hearings, were answered technically, I think. But so I guess the final piece of that is that I'm not seeing a problem with stormwater treatment per se, or how this is being handled.
My only note on that is, I know that there is an inspection schedule on the ground portions of this. If we can move forward, I would like the commission to get a copy of those reports. Similar to how we did the annual report from the company farms report, well, we just, for accountability, so we can review all that stuff. So on that, I would like to see that added to the special conditions.
I think the the underground chambers and that goes as far as treating the pollutants and all that, I think that's okay. As good as can be expected. My issues are water storm events and what happens with the outflow. I did look at precipitation data from Bradley Airport. And there's the 1 inch event that's happens all the time. The 2 year is 3.32 inches. The 10 year is 5.35 inches. This is a 24-hour period. And the 6 year is 6.61 inch. And the 100 year is 8.5.
Mr. Chairman, it's kind of my job to keep you on the rails. Unfortunately, I would suggest that is new information. It was not offered during the public hearing. It's certainly the research on. I would be careful about relying on that.
Okay. With their,
Was there, I believe the applicants, somewhere mentioned, people did reference the numbers for the disturbance.
Yeah, the items in this, anything that's in the public testimony.
well, there's 3 outlets. There's EW1, which is in the middle, ES or FDS1 in the upper right, and then the FDS2 down in the bottom. That's basically coming from the building itself up here. And they did the 25-year event. So this would be a 6.61 inch in the 24-hour period.
Can we just?
Sure, it's in Appendix B. Their stormwater report.
But the big thing is they were really the 25-year.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And with the new stormwater event or the stormwater report, they put a dotted line about the drainage of everything too, which extends the property itself that's to the south. There is a dotted line that went basically to that retaining pond, stormwater management. Is it D or D? Is where FES2 is? Is that?
Yeah, unfortunately that it washes out a little bit.
Yeah. But yeah.
Let me see if I can't.
It's that retaining pond right next to by the dumpster.
Oh yeah, I gotcha.
It's going all into there.
So the FDS2.
Yes, FDS. And with from their appendix B, at the 25-year storm event, they said the peak coming out of the outlet EW1 directly to the north would be 1.78 cubic feet per second, which is what it is. But if that's converted to gallons per second, not cubic feet per second, that's 13.32 gallons per second. That's a lot. And my concern would be that riprap is only about 6 feet. And at 13.32 gallons per second, it's not going to take long before it starts to fill. And FES2 is actually even worse. That's at the 25-year storm, that's going to be gushing out at 16.15 gallons per second. It's just coming off the roof. So when that fills up, then it goes to FES1 and exits the property. And they just, and I guess that's only be coming out at 3.5 gallons per second. It seems the outflow is gonna be kind of hot. And I'm worried about gullying on property that's not their own. And then eroding that and then having that silt or that material directly on the second floor. And that's just in a normal condition. If the ground is frozen in January or February, which happens, it's not gonna go on the ground, it's just gonna sheet right onto that property. Because it seems when I'm reading the record, it seems like they're assuming that it's going to be, there's gonna be some catching or infiltration on the property directly to the south. But if it's in February, December, January, February, the ground frozen, there isn't going to be any infiltration. It's going to go right onto that property. We're going to have even more water. So the flow rates are actually higher.
So that wasn't my understanding, but it's stuff that being collected in the ponds and going down or across one. But yeah, so this is a clarification question. One of the things that we ended with was town engineer was good with the 25 with the treatment that was going on 25-year case. That's what they were designed for, the 25-year case. But they had an example of what would happen on a larger case. They were designed for the 25 years. So is this concern addressed by the town engineer? I don't know how to. I'm trying to get around stuff. The part that we had in the public comment was the town engineer had agreed with this assessment. There wasn't going to be a problem with anything else for the 25-year part.
So I think the response during the testimony, and I think I made the response, was that the town engineer had no outstanding issues with the stormwater design.
Okay.
Is it part of our purview to affect other properties? Like if the water is being discharged and it erodes, is that part of our mandate?
Your purview is to review any adverse conditions on the wetland or water course.
And that's we're discharge. It comes off my side, but right.
It goes right down that flow right.
If it were to follow.
And there's nothing they can do because it's not their property. Fix it. Or to put the riprap all the way during the spring also to avoid gully because they don't own that property. I did see if there is like some ground vegetation, but it's mostly just leaves. And that's not going to hold back a lot of water.
Is there any idea of the condition that would have to be expected after a certain volume of water, there is building, so it could be repaired? I guess I understand it's on the property.
I think the real issue is that there's actually my overall question about the problem with water, but the other part is that there's not much of a mitigation because they're up against the other problem. If anything goes wrong, there's much they can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, with a big event, a 25-year event, or an event that lasts days and days, those catch basins are going to fill, or the tanks are going to fill up, and they're going to get saturated. They're not going to deal with the water. Right. So it's just all this going to the, be diverted directly out. Pollution is one thing, but again, those flow rates are pretty high.
Would it all mitigate your concern if that one outlet pipe was somehow diverted into like a number of smaller ones?
Yeah, I mean, right now, you know, all the flow rates and whatnot, they're all talking about. You know, it's just dispersed over the whole slope. Not just one outlet, not within a 5-foot section, 1-foot section. You know, 13 gallons per second, that's a lot of water. That's almost 800 gallons per minute. And a 4-inch fire hose is 400 gallons. So it's like a fire hose. Well, the 2-year event is 3.32 inches. So it's like, so that'd be say, cut that in half 400, that's one. Right now, EW1 is 2 fire hoses, and a 2-year event would be 1 fire. hose. It's still a lot. I mean, it's not gonna go straight down, but riprap will do its job, so it's not gushing straight down, but it's still a volume of water. It's gotta go down. Yeah, I guess you could spread it out, but then the whole, you know.
Sure, but
I
I
agree.
mean, in theory, if you spread it out over the slope, it's not like the applicant is creating the 25-year storm, right? There's gonna be significant runoff going over the terrain either way in a significant storm. So if it were spread out, you could argue it's not
Correct.
creating a new concern.
And again, my concern is also in the winter, there's not gonna be any infiltration under southern part. This is gonna all gonna sheet down, so it's gonna be hot. I would imagine it would be higher. Common sense that it's gonna be higher. It's looking in the ground, south, it's all gonna go over that property. So storm management area B is gonna fill up fast. And then it's all just gonna go off to the FES1.
But in that one case, isn't it true that if there was anything here, it was all frozen over, the water would be coming both sides, still going off that.
Correct.
That edge.
Correct.
You know, there wouldn't be any ability of it to go into the ground. At least
Correct.
some of the time, some of it will be going into the ground in the chamber before it comes out.
Correct. But then again, it'd be spread out over the
Sure.
whole thing instead of being concentrated in one section.
Which goes back to Andrew's comment that the ability to spread it out a little bit would help.
Yeah, it's a 1-inch pipe or 1-foot pipe in FES1.
Maybe do like 3 separate sections or something like that. So
I don't know that I'm saying any particular. I'm just thinking some way that would make it more diffuse as opposed to concentrating all the flow onto one riprap section. That I think is a reasonable concern that could cause some erosion over time. I mean, we don't know the future. I don't actually know.
Correct. I know,
But
but I can see problems. I mean, there, on Hoskins. We approved it the other, I think it was last year, the road was washing away. We approved them to stabilize the bank, guardrails, but the riprap was all the way down the street. So it can't erode because it's all in rock. From the storm drain.
But it is, I mean, what you're suggesting is sort of a mitigation they could do on their property if there was a problem at some point in time, which would then go back to, what we're saying about special conditions or respecting for that.
Yeah, again, it's the concentration that with these fire hose like discharges, a lot of water.
It is a concentration and how well is the direct drainage into the ground soil working for all of the conditions. And it's hard to know what that's gonna be.
Correct.
Until it's.
Exactly.
Until it's built and operational. And that, this actually goes right to some of my concerns about this project, sort of off the stormwater side, as a state park, which is typically when we're approving things, we're sort of approving things that matter during construction. We're trying to mitigate all that. And then after construction's over, the impact is really low. But for us, in this particular case, the construction techniques all seem to be sort of, state of the art, as good as you can get them. But there's relatively little that can be done after it's built. And it's, a 40-50 year lifespan, something. And it's also very highly concentrated. And that kind of, you don't have a lot of experience.
Correct. Yeah, that's, yeah. Exactly. Construction is still, so that's standard operating procedure.
My only way around that would be sort of think about how we go back and look at other relative places we have concentration with cross model that we have, what is from our past experience, we have large amounts coming out. What have we had to do to handle the erosion, relatively speaking?
Correct.
It's hard for me to put the cubic feet per second or the gallons or a water thing from a rain event into that context, right? So,
Yeah, if they own the full property, then they just put their that on.
That would create its own issues, just for the right, to put it out there, like from a fisheries concern, riprap has its own problems. So I don't know that I would, even if they could, put a use riprap all the way to the brook, I'm not. So I would actually want that as a condition.
Any other centric piece?
one of my other ones was just a collection of material that might end up in the wetlands, from the use, and I thought that this rework of the system, so things weren't quite as tight and there's a boundary around it, help minimize that potential effect. Because again, anything that gets over into the other part of the property, is really to mitigate that. And it's still a lot of use, right? But I think that through this redesign, through a bunch of the suggestions, that's been minimized also given this general layout.
One of my concerns was the location of the dumpsters, that's been mitigated.
And the applicant had said that they would get a fair existing dumpster. I just would like to see that for this is.
So just for the commission's knowledge, we did not add that as a condition because it is shown on the it's in the last set of full plans as a detail in the plan set. We usually don't write conditions for items that we didn't write a condition for the roll curb, for instance, because it's shown now on the plan. And again, we referenced the plan in a draft condition.
No, you're saying, I'm just asking, so you're saying that you should like make the plantings, that's also referenced in the site plan. That we're saying all the natives and all that, so that again,
We referenced the landscaping plan as part of that set.
I think my last wetlands concern was that many of the sort of long-term wetlands impacts, there is, you know, in terms of lighting, sound, et cetera, there aren't a lot of standing best practices for that. And so it seemed to me that it was hard to, you know, it was hard to, I'll say, you know, figure out best practices for that for long-term exposures. Or something that's not sure of this. I thought that was one of our, you know, I suspect the things relative to that will change as time goes on, but that's not now. And that was another class of big concerns the community had, but I don't think there's any ways to I don't think there's a lot of background information on how that's been helped. That was like the last of the wetlands that are just stuff, but
I was thinking, maybe, I know there's a lot of tests that are done, you know, spray, at various times of the year. And that, when you do the filtration, with that, there's something, new conditions, or, you know, mitigate much exercise.
I didn't know for like water treatment or stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's landscaping stuff. And then pesticides, in there, something you just have to make conditions.
And that considered so for.
Yeah.
And if I remember from the landscape plan and stuff, there wasn't a lot that we did in the first place, and most of it being weighted. Species that shouldn't need it, so I would just avoid any kind of need for pesticide at all. On an area that small, it could be done by hand anyway.
Yeah, part of the report.
For just so I'm clear, to the other parking lot, the parking spaces, most of them on the west side, that is going to be grass right now. That will not be, that they took away.
So
It's not, I see it sort of crossing.
So the way it's proposed as part of this draft revision is that the applicant would keep those spaces as grassed until needed or until required by zoning commission to provide those spaces. If none of that happens, I understand it that they would remain grassed. But if they are required for construction, they would be pervious paver.
So I would just,
So in this case, it's proposed for both, right? Grass, or if needed by marketplace or required by the zoning commission, then it would go to paper.
pervious,
Yes,
so that would just go right in the ground.
yes. Yeah, allows for infiltration.
Natural.
Yeah. I mean, there's some structure to it, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we down on by the band shell.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or fine.
Yeah, but then again, we think about natural conditions, right? Frozen soil, it's not gonna be infiltrating or either, right? And then just on the pesticide, if that is, I would say, I'll say, no possibility of using something that is required, but integrated pest management practices. Would be a better way to follow those guidelines.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Shut the door. Would be in the station or something.
Like ticks. All that. Like maybe use a product called Wonder Side, and it's water soluble. And it's made with, I think, seed space. And, so I put it on last week, I read it again. It doesn't stay in it's like it's selling.
Integrated pest management is more of a serious problem at the station or something. The integrated pest management still applies to the natural business, like seed oil is still toxic to birds. So encourage one project to have to follow those practices.
Yeah, rather than spray indiscriminate. I know there was initially concern about the species migrating across the property. And the zoning term was added to Waveland. Does anyone still have any concerns on that? Or
That was documented in the record. Something accommodating the concerns of the concrete, concerns of the paths.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
I think we just need to lean in.
Lean into it.
So I jotted down a couple other concerns that were brought up by us as the public. We want to say whether or not we feel like they can adequately be addressed or to itemize it more specifically.
Yeah.
One was light pollution potential. Do we feel as though the concerns brought up by commissioners and the public that were reasonable were addressed by the applicant?
I think, based on the walls being raised up an extra floor, the dimming of the lights to 40%. Several other measures. There'll still be some issues, but, by and large, I think
I would say that they've been reduced to the levels that they're capable of getting. I suspect that we will have this time goes on.
Just curious, what issues do you suspect as time goes on?
I suspect we'll find that we solve the problem. So that if you look as far as security, it's like more heavily regulated, but we don't have technology, given the technology. That is all. So I think all the applicants has met all of the goals, to mitigate the things that we know now.
that's what I have related to people want. That's
Right.
With the lights being dimmed on the ends too.
yeah, well, I recall they said they were able to get those partially. That if that's not in plan, we will get that in special conditions.
I believe they also were willing to specify the Kelvins, excuse me,
Yes,
per Marjorie's recommendation. I don't remember if that was included in special conditions or not.
It was not.
Okay.
Yeah, 2700, nice warm, yellowish.
They have snow removals. Also, my concern. I believe it's been addressed by other ability.
I agree. Another concern that was brought up was noise pollution.
Does that fall under the same issue as the light pollution? If maybe they found this issue later down the road, but you don't have anything. The moment.
I would argue there's strong evidence for negative impacts on wetland species from significant noise pollution. And it would be more of a question of whether or not we think significant noise pollution is going to be occurring in the wetlands.
Occurring in the impact. That's what you said occurring in. And that's, and this is not the level. That's
Sure.
the area. But it's, if you mean impacting the wetlands?
Yes.
So I was going through the our wetlands thing, so there was a specific item about noise in there, but there was a general catch-all for a sort of degradation of the wetlands, which is, you know, where some of these other things fit. Unfortunately, you know, this is one of these other cases, right? So during construction, if we can handle all that, it's how this will be used over the next several years. We don't have a good handle on that. I also don't think there's a mitigation for that, right?
Yeah, the fence is 4 feet. And the lights don't shine, headlights don't shine, right? Into people's, you know, houses,
But it's noise.
but the noise
Yeah.
coming and going, doors slamming. How do you, yeah, it's, how do you quantify that? Or how do you mitigate?
Would you make the arguments that would hold up that in the creation of elections?
I think it's probably one of the part to mitigate it. Maybe you should put that one on that list. That's one of the talk about. What else is on your list?
Well, if I can just it's hard to then say, hard to know how would the noise exist on the web, different than any other neighborhood next to a wetland, lawnmowers, cars, all the same stuff happening, that we don't have any regulations or we don't do anything to reduce that long sense.
And it is right next to houses,
That's what I was.
a lot of traffic.
I think it's generally the concentration of the air. Yeah, so that's what it might say, right? It's not an individual piece of that, it's that many, that much in that one area, that close. But again, you know, there's Hoffman Street on one side, there's a bike path on the other side. There's a lot of stuff on both ends of it, come together. As long as it's going to wilderness. So.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you could say reducing the number of units to 64 is in part a mitigation against the amount of noise produced.
I thought of one, I thought the concept of, you know, Legos and a bit more talk, you know, pollution is the best mitigation effect for anything that's like a water time, because dropping the number of population down number is significant, reduction. It's one of everywhere. Place, nowadays,
George, has there been traffic studies on Elm Street? how many foot hours?
So as part of this application submission to the zoning commission, as part of the site plan review, there's a traffic study submitted, yes.
That in the packet?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not.
The next item I have on my list, which is related to stormwater, which we already talked about, and pesticides, which is contaminants more broadly. So what potential contaminants are being introduced to Second Brook?
The filtration is from the first stage of water falls was very substantial. I still have some concerns about if there's additional contaminants after that first stage is fallen. Where are they gonna go? How are they gonna get dealt with?
But is this in fact any different than any habits that the at any other farm? They come to that farm, part of the farm.
I think the, well,
Yeah, I'm not aware of the other large parking lots that the commission for a number of years that has. It's. And it's would be like average calls, but I guess we're thinking about. But they, any additional damage would. And then we got.
And explore that. And infiltrate the filtration system or stuff in there. Stuff overboard discharge.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have a little bit of lingering concern about this one in particular. A bunch of potential contaminants, but I'm thinking about one in particular, the PPD associated with degradation of tires. That's fairly recently been associated with die-offs of brook trout, which we know are present in Second Brook as well as Slimy Scullion. But the thing is, infiltration is the best management practice recommended to deal with that. That's what their stormwater management plan is doing. I don't know realistically what more we could ask of them, so I don't really know what to do with that concern.
We keep coming back towards, so our concerns are how this will be offered, how it will be used. So as part of some of the criteria, the way you inspect that, and we start talking about this, better water, inspection for, the stormwater, et cetera. If those are things that get a handle on, then we can know what we might do with mitigation.
Another question, what happens if the plan is not what would be theoretically that, hey, this was designed this way, not reduce emissions. We have any really. The idea, this idea was the conflict a waterfall. I wouldn't know when that was granted, so I don't know what is outlined if a problem is disputed ever. So, but I do know that we take a copy of water report. Appreciate that. problems, that's awesome. But I don't know if there's anything, what conditions that would be able to mitigate a problem they don't have.
So it's still a step forward.
I mean, there's not, let me just offer this. And obviously we have enforcement practices. There's nothing that allows any site, no matter how it's constructed, to have proven tangible negative impacts on the wetlands. So an enforcement activity could cure. It's easier to do that when those requirements are clear. You know, I don't know how you go back. You certainly couldn't go back 15 years later and say that, you know, there's some light that's, you know, affecting this or that or the other thing. But I mean, I think if the plan as constructed wasn't working or needed fixing or needed an upgrade, I think under the law we're permitted to at least work on a solution with the property owner as time goes by.
So if there were some degradation of the discharge system that it's well beyond what was laid out, there would be tools that town has.
Yeah, let me come back to you with a clearer
Oh.
kind of approach to that.
So if we require testing of the law, rules, then something that's an issue that has to be under a certain threshold, or something needs to be rectified.
I mean, I think in order to do that, we have to know the current conditions.
I'm not sure you can exceed the requirements and threshold under state law and state stormwater and state erosion sediment control, and you know those are handbooks that are followed. I'm not sure you can exceed those.
So much information in the site plan gives us, you know, the levels of saying for the output, stormwater, how much the tanks, the infiltrate, all that. So when we have all that information, whatever report we do, we see that, let's say the outflow, you know, we have that 2-year event, and you notice that, you know, the outflow is measured at a higher rate, what instead of the site plan, you know, we have that information, we have the levels that, in essence, the developer has said these things are going to be at this level. So then if we also have, you know, we notice there's more outflow or there's more flooding in Second Brook, we drive by honestly, and it's water gushing out of, you know, where, you know, the outlet and all that, that would be something that, you know, we would say, well, that's not what was detailed in, you know, the condition. I mean, so to me, the benchmarks are there, but it's done in front, which according to what we've been told are best practice. I mean, that information is there. And that plus is George's state statute as far as the types of rules, the number of things.
What here, put in, when one of our firearms examples of, said that X amount of rain, one firearm is discharging. Yeah.
I mean, the information, all the benchmarks are there. I mean, you have, I don't know how many pages I haven't counted. I know it's been a lot of time reading it. There's a lot of information in there. We had a lot of public presentation from the developer. I don't want to say promises were made, but certainly the benchmarks were alluded to as a concrete standard for best practices. And if you find that, and you know, it's up for a year and these best practices don't do anything, then you know, I think then there is some enforcement, at least, deal with that. I mean, the issue with this is no matter what, it's gonna be more of, there's more there. 4 units, it's a parking lot right now, family home, and some of the things that the developers mitigated, they're, the flow of the banks. But, it just, if it's going to be built, if it's approved to be built, then benchmarks are there, things be mitigated. And if we find that they're not, then, that's when some sort of enforcement.
I think one of the concerns of going back to the criteria of how much water coming out is that, put up in all the documents. But, as was mentioned earlier, the question is how is that handled as a discharge? Is the thing sort of open to how effective is that? Even if we all agree that it was supposed to be X amount of water coming out, the current design is that the work breath as standard is going to be enough. It's not going to block that. So you can still have the exact same amount of water coming out, but that may not work as expected. And that's what actually leads us to the most damage right away.
Okay, so another concern that was brought up by the public was potential archaeological value. I don't really know if this is in our purview, but it's one of the concerns brought up, so I feel like we should, through our due diligence, we feel like it was addressed because it was addressed.
It definitely wasn't addressed, I don't think it is in the purview. And that's the issue. I could be wrong. What I've read.
Yeah, it's not.
There wasn't any proof otherwise either. It wasn't proof that there were things. You know what I'm saying? So there isn't, the evidence has to work both ways. There was, and I think, I remember correctly, I don't want to kind of turn up, but what I'm saying is that there's no, I don't believe, even if it were in our, it is, there wasn't any evidence of pottery or something found there that found. So I don't know how we can address it. There should be evidence that's front of us.
So traditionally, that a concern like that would could or would be addressed during the site plan review process by the zoning commission. The zoning commission could choose to consider a development condition, perhaps requiring a pre-development survey of some sorts, but it wouldn't typically come from this body.
Thank you. So one concern that was brought up, and I'll just say, I think this one's adequately addressed, was the calculations of runoff incorporating a secondary property. And I think that those original questions were definitely addressed, but part of that conversation led to the applicant discussing the idea of donating those other 2.39 acres to Simsbury Land Trust as a condition. And I'm wondering if we are in our purview to hold them to their offer to make that a condition.
Oh, on the other side of the bike trail.
Yeah.
The bike trail.
As a mitigation measure.
I believe we have some similar measures in previous applications where, we recognize the impact or potential impact project, and we have secured other properties, donations. But I believe that it's happened. I don't know if those are.
Something like that happens that give us a need to look at mitigating problems later on. I don't know.
That's a great question.
It just seems to be on the other side of the bike trail, it's just woods to the river. It's actually, it's down. This property, it drops down. It's fairly flat. I don't know how far from the brook to this property line is on the other side.
So again, I would offer that traditionally that might be something that would come as a recommendation from the Conservation Commission to the Zoning Commission for them to consider as part of that site plan approval. But under the wearing the hat of the other body.
Another concern that was raised was potential thermal impacts. So this is another one related to the stormwater management. Are there any potential thermal impacts to Second Road?
I thought that had been mitigated through the stormwater treatment system in general. And then if you're off and into like the running off the top, it gets better.
I agree.
That's what I was talking about.
Any flow would be the same temperature as whatever the water's going into Second Road. In grade.
No, I agree. I thought that was addressed also.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I jotted down. I'm sure there's others I missed. I'm gonna go through my notes. Others feel free to do the same.
Right, so that's essentially the side. Was there any, I don't believe there were any questions about the actual construction technique, stabilization of the parking lot area. That's all. So, early on.
That's-
So one other thing that was brought up, I'm just remembering, was any potential impacts to the aesthetic or recreational value of the wetlands.
Well, it's gonna be a 4-story building. There's a 2-story house now. And a big parking lot. It's gonna be a significant change.
It's aesthetic, but does it fall into aesthetic value of the wetland, or is that outside the law?
It's gotta be outside of the wetland. Because of the inlet. There's all the upland. But it's the aesthetics of it around. The question is that you're looking at the wetland from the bike path. What impact is that by itself that one? And I think it's, you know, I kind of think that's hard to quantify at this point, right? Yeah, I think that these are the ones we're getting in now, right? So we start with the technical parts, the wetlands part. But that's like the last thing in the requirements is for that impact of the aesthetics of the wetland, for the recreational area, the bike path and stuff.
Yeah, I think any bill that we use, I they are the framework that set up that that's any relevant for what you know that.
The area along that bike path is higher density, because buildings right down there. You know, the original one goes on top of that,
is the higher density area. So this is obviously, you know, like you said.
Yeah, then we'll get it Hazelville. There's, privacy fence. All you see is the 10-foot tall, whatever it is. And it's just to the north of this. You know, pardon?
You know, not.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, it's not pristine wilderness. It's a pretty developed area.
Um, when everyone else feels, it is getting towards 9 o'clock. We have all brought forth points. I need to digest them. I know what we also want to be part of this. I would suggest continue this at a special meeting next Tuesday. And depending on where everyone's heads are, I think that we should have a draft of a motion. We have one to approve. We should also have a draft of a motion to deny to consent.
The only one I think that make that thought is that you kind of want to all the wetland part of it, like all the technical stuff. If there's anything else that we'd like to bring up for discussion, maybe now's the time to sort of add that, and then we can think about it, so that we come back here prepared to kind of touch a little bit on the aesthetics part of it. Obviously, a lot of the public comments were about things that touch on the wetlands, but weren't really within our purview, within our technical stuff. So it sounds like if we want to address some of those, now's the time to do it. But then we're exactly prepared for what you're saying at the next meeting.
I mean, I'm not sure if we can. Do we have to put them in a community area?
So that'd be next week.
I think the chairwoman expressed interest in having an in-between meeting between your regular meeting and then the May 2nd meeting.
Okay. So. We can have this and still bring forward.
Yeah, just for timeline, I've got to go back and look at the timeline. I think no later than your May 2nd meeting.
Yeah.
I don't, at 35 days, I would recommend you meet on the 25th strongly. And if you do choose to do that, that meeting will be at Town Hall, back in the main meeting room at 7:30.
We would need a motion to table this.
But I think the motion would simply be to move this application. It's number 2, the special meeting on April 25th for continued deliberation and possible action. Something like that.
Okay.
But I would have somebody make that motion, so it's not staff making the motion.
Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'm thinking about what Charles suggested. I'm wondering if there are other public comments that we want to address. Even if it's just to address them for the sake of saying, like, you know, it's not that this doesn't matter. It's not that we don't hear you, it's that we're trying to stick to what we're authorized to consider.
I kind of think if we fill out within us, we can do a little bit of that, right? It would help. Yeah. They know the framework of conversation better.
No objection.
So one thing, I think it was brought up by 7 Nutmeg Court resident, was for us to consider likely impacts to health or safety for individual or community, which I have not actually gone back to confirm since then, but she was reading off to us the regulations about the things that we are supposed to consider. And from her perspective, there's likely impacts on health or safety for individuals or community as a result of this application.
I think for our purview, it would be the runoff into second floor as far as health. You know, it's fire, access, that's not really, that's the zoning.
Yeah, I was thinking of both of that falls in zoning stuff.
If you're like wetlands, yeah, sure.
Right.
It is second floor. And then. The same thing would be like sightlines and traffic. And there's very legitimate concern, but there's nothing to do with that one.
Yeah, I think all of those are really something within our ability to regulate. Was there, we had a lot of discussion about obviously the stormwater, the parking, et cetera, to address those.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap between what we've discussed and what was brought up. I'm trying to think which ones actually count as like a unique item as opposed to being considered, but we've already talked about. One, we already discussed snow removal, being okay with their snow removal plan. But one of the concerns the property brought up was, that was brought up during the public hearing, was concern about the calcium chloride brine given because of pre-treatments, you don't actually know there's going to be a snow event or a rain event. And even though you're using less, potentially you're pre-treating in advance of several storms that don't happen, and it ends up having a greater negative impact.
Right, but I think we presented a study, I think from UNH, said this is sort of the best practices for dealing with snow event. Once again, we go back to the best practice for the situation that's there. So, I think it was an extensive study. I think it was from UNH.
Yeah. My question too, in that same vein is, Hot Meadow Street is right there. I don't know, but I'm not sure where the storm drains are on Hot Meadow Street, where those go.
Yeah, what's the relative?
What's the relative? They're correct. And did they use? I'm gonna say those drains were made a long time ago, and it probably goes right into the second floor. I don't know for the fact. The same with the tire, the chemicals in the tire. That's a concern, but does have that dump right in? I know the parking lot at the, I parked at the by Boy Scout Hall because I knew this parking lot's gonna be crowded. I just looked at, the first meeting we had here, there is no curb or anything. That water just right off that parking lot, right in that street. There's no catch basin, nothing. It's just right into that. It's built so long, there wasn't.
So another concern, we didn't really talk about potential impacts during construction today, but I think it was the resident of 14 Nutmeg Court was concerned during construction that according to their site report, there's saturated groundwater present, the soils would be sensitive, muddy, and unstable. And that resident was concerned that during constructions there could be significant erosion into the wetlands, and also that cutting trees would further destabilize the soil.
So I remember we discussed the trees. If there's not significant trees along the property, during construction. If it does check on these construction sites, if there is a major problem developing, would be addressed. It's generally how, there's always a potential unforeseen issue. We get 200 years storm back to back, and that would probably derail most site plans during construction. And I believe the town staff does check in on building sites, especially if the signal gets to see if any problems are developing.
Yeah, the answer is that, half of those draft conditions of approval for any wetlands application, talk about the proper installation of the erosion sediment control measures, proper stabilization. And so during the course of construction, staff does site visits to make sure that those erosion and sediment control measures are in place and continue to do the job that they do.
I know it doesn't take much to start, even just grab up the grass. Like the house I'm in now, I grew up and built a house, and the first rainstorm in the river, literally running through a backyard, grass. It goes there. But there was no silt fencing. So,
This is standard construction.
correct.
There's sign off that we know how to mitigate.
Right.
So I think that's, at least from my perspective, that's, it's a concern, but we have things in place to address that. That's.
I was just, saying, just a few trees, some grass. It's once you have no vegetation, it will exist.
Right.
No trees.
So one other comment that came up repeatedly was the suggestion that this site is just inherently impractical, and perhaps a prudent alternative would be developing on an alternative site, not developing this site at all.
That maybe something is a discussion. I don't want this on the site.
It's remarkable. If someone wants to buy it and develop it, as long as the conditions are met.
Whether or not we do with that.
Yeah,
Doesn't
there's-
matter.
I think all of us can think of a half a dozen sites that would be better, but
Yeah, we can.
the price is probably too high. Cost prohibitive to build.
And again, it's outside.
Yes.
Purview.
Yeah.
But I think again, that's a major concern.
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely. Or
It's the mitigation of what we do on this site now, that we agree, that we address them, that's what we can. And the alternatives, and there's been several alternatives. The other one that kept coming up a lot was the aesthetics from the neighbors stuff, but I put that into the, it's joined with the weapon. Sort of connected those two groups, but again, I don't know how we address that. I mean, I've definitely heard that, but again, go back to your question of heard that concern, but I'm not sure how that.
any agree with that.
the only thing I can think of is like the Hazel Meadow property, big privacy fence. Standpoint of bike trail. I don't know if that would. It's gonna be way above that. But as far as a practical aesthetic solution for something. But I'm not sure that this thing, 4 stories, 10 or 12 foot, that's too much. Correct. But it's already there. All on the other side, it goes from, it's all big, it's a long, that's.
If I remember correctly, I think the applicant explicitly stated that they would not want a 6-foot or greater fence.
Oh, on the bike trail.
Not.
He really more trees on the other side of the fence. Just a lot.
Yeah.
Were there other concerns that we have addressed?
One concern was the expert reports and their evaluations only considering the property itself as opposed to looking for wildlife or other concerns present on adjoining properties.
Because of valid concern, but the requirements are looking at the property here, not.
Yeah,
Correct, but it's
yeah, I would agree. I would think if there were some obvious harm to flora and fauna wetlands, that we don't about that. That's a purview. Okay. Whether we think, the other side is whether we think there isn't, we need to have something like that. Certainly, if there was some harm to wetlands, then I think that's good for us.
Yeah, I think that there's a specific in the record that presented to us on that. Some considerations, the potential impact. Yeah, I think, you're right. The guy said there's no impact that side. But the point, the water's gotta go off their site. Right into the upland review area. It's like 2 feet from the property. That's what
I'm confused. Who's property?
Hazel Meadow owns the property is north.
Yeah, down the front road, right?
No, on this side. Yes,
It comes right, so.
right that dotted line, the long and the dash line, long and short dashes. Like EW2, that line right, that's the part, that belongs to Hazel. So that water will go into the upland review, you can stump them right into the upland review area. So that's the concern. It's like, oh, there's no impact on the site. It's technically correct, but the water is going to end up in the second road at some point, whether it goes through the groundwater, surface water.
I don't know whether to agree or disagree. All I know is to push back a little bit. Wetlands expert come in and say, you're going to have any impact, or bring engineer, all sorts of documents presented to us. I'm not saying I like this or I don't like it. All I'm saying is I don't have any evidence contrary, other than what I think, how I feel. I just think we need to be careful. That's all I'm saying. Because,
I just want to get
no, I think, and I'm not saying it isn't a valid point. All I'm saying is I don't have any evidence to the contrary.
My imagination.
Yeah, I'm not saying I like it. Right, everything's so blah, blah, but I'm just saying, I just urge caution. What we consider, make sure we stay on topic. We talk about things we have purview over, and if there's some sort of evidentiary stuff that, It's been any of the reports, but I just be careful that you don't stray too far afield. That's all. That's all I'm saying is that you exercise caution.
The point I think, we went back to stormwater again. The point we were talking about was, animal motion across the whole park, right? That was that. And we typically don't do that. So think about, it was a 2-acre lot going up. Construction like that, we wouldn't talk, think about that. So why is this different?
I think I brought up the years about. About migratory species that would pass through the parking lot. Right now, it pass through this grass.
Right,
But allow density, slope curving, but then more passes through that.
Okay.
So that would be able to accommodate that concern.
So let's say, that aspect of here is that
Yeah. It's not just a funnel, it's just really down to start getting the kids to go back.
I think, like, again, that's been heard, it's been mitigated as well as you could with the fundamental philosophy. And we don't have anything specific that we're trying to.
Yeah, and I think the applicant has addressed substantially nearly all of the concrete concerns that we brought to them. You know, like looking at the details of this 64-unit proposal as compared to what we first reviewed, they have made a lot of significant changes to mitigate our concerns.
Things going through that we're hearing. I read all of it, like I usually those categories too.
I think so too. Yeah, there's some sub points. For example, we didn't talk about freshwater mussels, but I think that would again bring us back to stormwater management and contaminants. You know, they're also tightly interrelated. But that was another topic we haven't explicitly discussed.
Comes back to the monitoring part, and that's not going to be impacted by the structure per se. It's much more about the out of place and put things that handle that. Much more about how this is used the next several decades.
Yeah, I don't know. Those are the categories I grouped them into, but of course, if others are thinking of concerns that came up, we don't have to just stick to my list.
The only other concern I think that I heard a lot of it doesn't think falls in our purview, is just to make sure the river flooding and what it does the second road, back it up. But again, that's kind of the other direction. And it doesn't really impact us being in the other two areas. Right. So that was the only one that I probably heard a few times, but I just don't think that's.
And I mean, if we get another. It's a lot more investment.
Right.
Yeah, I thought the applicant addressed that effectively, describing the proposed development versus natural conditions and how, in all likelihood, it would actually be reduced CFS coming off the site compared to natural conditions. And so from a flooding perspective, it seems likely to have any impact at all, if anything, extremely marginal reduction.
Yeah, I think the point that was being made was the river floods so much, goes up and down, but I don't, and I agree with all that. But that's not going to impact this, and they've done the best they can with the infiltration system, which is proven over what is down lower, reflects stuff. So I think if that's sort of the end of the list of things, then I think we're ready to think about this and go back next week.
Or I guess I'll bring up one other one, which I think is certainly not in our purview, but it's not to say it doesn't matter, just to acknowledge we've heard it. Impacts on property values. You know, that's something that was brought up repeatedly. I know that's not in our purview, but just that was another common thread among public comments that I wanted to acknowledge.
goes right into the aesthetics, the other part is one piece of property affects the neighbors, and this one affects the neighbors to the outside, and, but I don't think, at least we haven't gone to hear it, and support that the town has to hear it. But it's definitely outside of our purview as the wetlands.
Move this to a special day.
We will schedule it. I mean, you're going to schedule it right now. Yeah. So the only question, if you don't mind, staff, just interjecting. So, based upon my hearing of this evening, I mean, I haven't heard a lot of kind of citing the criteria for denial and for adverse impacts on the wetlands. And so it may be difficult for me to craft without perhaps you addressing some of that criteria, if any.
My biggest issue being the gulling, the erosion coming off of
Stormwater related.
stormwater. Yeah, could there be more in EW 1, 2, 3, 4, and more than the big one? I'm just looking at the, the FES one, it just needs a little undersized. Because it's gonna collect all that water from the other properties. And from stormwater management fees, it seems like it's so small that it's gonna be gushing out of that. That bigger, maybe trying to get, several.
Could you address that in an additional condition of approval instead, in lieu of a? I mean, if you can address it, that could be something for consideration.
My concerns are the monitoring. Which one kind of one? How do we know what? If this is working as expected? I think stormwater regret a huge one. I think the second water measurement stands the infiltration water. So I think some amount of monitoring to make sure that we understand that this operates, they go a long way to mitigating the operational parts, and therefore the impact on the wetlands that we're worried about. I think almost everything we've talked about, there are concerns. You can in fact monitor in some way.
All right, well, I'll ask again then, do you want a draft review of a denial motion?
In a perfect world, I'd like to review. If we don't have anything substantial to. Then
I'll work with the town attorney to review our options. I think you do have a motion and a second.
all in favor?
Am I right? Did you get a second for the move in the meeting? Maybe you didn't.
All in favor? Aye. Moving for general commissions and.
Staff has no additional thing to add this evening. I'm happy to report on the agent approval at your next meeting. I think it's an in-ground pool, above ground pool, 50 feet from the, I don't even remember what it is.
That's not-
No, just move that to May 2nd. I'll report on it on your regular meeting on May 2nd.
All right. Favor? Commissioner McDonald, Chairman, and voting.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.